My name is Robert Simels, and this is Injustice for All. This podcast will be about the justice system. So, there are many programs you can listen to. Why this one? I have been in the system for over 50 years. 5.5 years as a prosecutor, 30 plus years as a defense attorney, and 10 years as an inmate. I am going to tell you all the secrets about the system. I've got much to share, nothing to hide. You're going to get the unvarnished truth from myself and my guests, and we're going to explore why the system does not work. I played the system at the highest levels. I represented some of the biggest people in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. People like Henry Hill, people like Fat Cat Nichols, people like Kenneth Supreme McGriff, and others. And the government decided that I was playing at too high a level and was winning too often. And I found out that winning has consequences. And that's how I wound up spending 10 years in prison. But I'm going to pull back the curtain for you. I'll tell you about why I think the system can work, why it fails, and nobody knows this better than me. I've lived the consequences. This is Robert Simels, and this is Injustice for All. So let's talk about what I want to tell you about. I want to tell you about how this system works. I want to tell you about how the system fails. I want to tell you of all of its flaws and its benefits. And there are many. It doesn't work, is the bottom line. It doesn't work, and all of us who are in the system know that it doesn't work. So why haven't we corrected it? It's too simple to let it go forward. It's too hard to change it. Politicians don't want to change it. Legislators don't want to change it. People in the system who sit on the bench, who practice law, they don't want to change it. The only people who want to change are those who are being accused of either a crime or are litigants in civil cases, whether it be divorce or a financial type of a case. We know that the guilty sometimes walk free, and we know sometimes the innocent are found guilty. Having money and power frequently make the difference in whether or not you walk free or you're found guilty. And that's why in white-collar cases, there are usually very few convictions. And in drug cases and others where the people have money, they have a chance to win. If they have no money, they have almost no chance to win. We're going to talk about the families, too, that are impacted. I mean, nobody takes into account the families. Judges always say in criminal cases when they're sentencing someone, I'm aware about your family, I'm aware of your circumstances, and I've read their letters, and I was moved by their letters, and then they give you the maximum sentence. And you say to yourself, why would you even make such a nonsensical statement as, I was moved by their letters? You weren't. But we all accept it. We all accept judges saying the stupidest things that they say. And you would say to yourself, listen, before they got to be a judge, weren't they a lawyer? Didn't they have clients? Didn't they know the impact on a family? When someone goes to prison, it impacts every member of the family. When somebody loses a big civil case, it impacts all of the family. When someone loses in a divorce case, whether it be custody or alimony, whatever it may be, that impacts the whole family. And so we're going to talk about all of these things. And we're going to talk about the most rudimentary of things in a courtroom. We have all seen, whether it was from Perry Mason or the Defenders or any recent legal shows that exist, people walk into a court, they put their hand on a Bible, and they swear to tell the truth. Very rarely do they do that. Maybe they want to do it, but they've been coaxed into not doing it, whether it's by the prosecutors, the law enforcement agents behind them, therapists. Anyone can impact a potential witness. Law enforcement witnesses, make no mistake about it, teach witnesses how to shade the truth. They themselves shade the truth when they're on the witness stand. They manipulate witnesses to have a different memory than potentially the real facts, because they understand how it plays before a jury. The tighter the recollection, the more aggravated it makes it sound, the better off they are. And so if you think that people walk into court, and I'm not accusing them of lying, I'm accusing them of being manipulated. And they're manipulated by the system so that the Bible means nothing. And I know to some of you, the Bible means everything. And maybe you would not lie or hope to lie when you took the witness stand. But you haven't been subjected to the guiles of the system, the people who seek to make you adopt their version because that will achieve the outcome that perhaps you and certainly they want. Why do prosecutors do that? Why do law enforcement people do that? Law enforcement people generally do it because they really believe that you're guilty, or they believe that there should be consequences for whatever your conduct has been. And so they believe they are on the side of the angels, like prosecutors in part, but prosecutors have other agendas. They want to either advance within their office, become a supervisor, or win big cases and be able to go into private practice and demand big fees. Judges also want to see the outcome that they desire. And so they will manipulate the system during the course of a trial. Judges are always so nice to jurors. They're always so concerned, so considerate. We don't want to keep you waiting, but they always keep you waiting. They don't want to make your stay any longer than it has to be. They don't care. So what you get is a false bravado by the judges, seemingly sincere, because at the end they want you to listen to their instructions and the way in which they intonate those instructions to have you do what they think the outcome should be. Never think that the judges don't have a motivation. Some want to be administrative judges, and being considered to be a winning judge and someone who accomplishes what the government wants or the state prosecutors want is a way to elevate them. It's a way to get up to an appellate court. It's a way to be considered for the Supreme Court. And every judge has that on his mind. Many years ago, we had the dean of Fordham Law School who became a federal judge in Brooklyn Federal Court. He was a liberal, wonderful guy. Got on the bench, and every decision he made was conservative. And people asked him, why? Why, Joe? Why did you do that? And he said, I want to go on the Court of Appeals. And he made it. So that's the reality. And we have to consider that, and that's what this show is going to consider and what we're going to explore. Another thing we're going to explore is not only what happens when someone is sentenced to prison, but the penalties that are associated with being sentenced. It could be a fine, it could be restitution, it could be forfeiture. All of those have devastating impacts on people. It's all part of the game. The game is we impose these penalties. We don't care about the people before us when we impose them, but the statistics look good. Every U.S. Attorney's Office in the nation likes to tell the Department of Justice at the end of the year, we obtained forfeitures in the amount of $3 million, $10 million, $100 million. Or we have restitution that's going to be owed to the United States and victims in the same amounts. But it's a fiction because they don't collect but 5% of that. So while it looks good, it's meaningless. In the meantime, the penalty to the people upon whom this is imposed is immeasurable. It stays as a judgment against them for 20 years. For 20 years, anytime they go to get a loan, to buy a home, to get a job, this judgment will show up. And it will impact everything that they do or want to do. For what? And we've assigned people to do things within that confine, that is restitution, forfeiture, fines, that have no interest in who you are and what is fair. I have a client who I was involved with who was ordered to pay restitution to a bank, PNC in fact, and for having falsified the mortgage application to get the loan. And the forfeiture and the restitution existed as part of the judgment against them. When they got out of prison, they renegotiated their mortgage with PNC and were permitted to stay in the property and not have to pay the higher amount. When we told the prosecutors that they had to reduce or eliminate the restitution or the forfeiture portions, they said, no, we are still going to collect it. So they were seeking to double dip. For what reason? PNC was happy, but they decided they would punish the client. So this is not going to be a show about politics, not left, not right. This is about truth. And there's no doubt that the politics of today make it convenient to attack the system. They may have a lot of good grapes about the system, but I'm not here to defend their actions or to attack their actions. But there's a better way to approach this than to dismantle the system. You can't. I mean, you may say you want to redo the FBI. It's very hard to do. Redo the Drug Enforcement Agency, very hard to do. Just think of it. If you had to redo the entire business that you are involved in, how would you go about it? Throw everybody out, start over again? That can't be done. And in the course of this show, you're going to hear from many different people from different walks of life. You'll hear from victims, those who were wrongfully convicted, spent years in prison, and ultimately were exonerated. You'll hear from legal experts. You'll hear from whistleblowers. You'll hear from journalists and activists fighting to hold the system accountable. Some of the cases have been in the news. Many of them have not. But nonetheless, you're going to hear about why there is injustice for all. The system has failed too long. And believe me, those who work in the system know that it's broken. I've lived it. I know it inside and out. And you'll be surprised to know that I still love the law. If I had my druthers, I would still be an attorney fighting the good fight. But I'm not. But I can do something just as significant from where I'm sitting now. And I will need your help to make this podcast work. Your calls, I want to hear you from you. You can write in. You can email us. You can contact me on social media. And maybe change won't occur overnight, and maybe never. But it's our obligation to try, not only for ourselves, but for those who follow us. And you might say to yourself, while we're on the topic, the guy's been in the business a long time, but why should we listen to him? What makes this podcast different than any others? As a boy, I watched a show on TV called Perry Mason. And that was, back in the day, the most popular show on TV. And what I loved about Perry was that he always did everything in his power and more to try to exonerate his clients who were unjustly charged. Did Perry come close to the line in trying to do that? He did everything he could for them. And he didn't sit behind his desk. He got out and he interviewed witnesses and he viewed crime scenes. He did what an attorney is supposed to do, be zealous on the part of their clients. And I spent my entire career being zealous because Perry was right. That's the way you get justice in a courtroom. And I was influenced not only by Perry, but I had a relative who was an attorney. And that relative had a library in his beautiful home filled with books about the law. And he began giving them to me when I was 9 years old. And I started reading them. I couldn't make sense of them because they were far beyond my capabilities. But I was so impressed with the way they were written, and it seemed so erudite, it seemed so meaningful, that it made an impression on me. And that plus Perry, I was motivated towards that area, except that I really wanted to be a baseball player. And until I gave up that dream after college, I decided at that point to become an attorney. I think that all of us who enter the practice of law think that our object is to obtain justice. But we get lost along the way. We get lost because the system is not what we anticipated. Strangely enough, my relative, the successful attorney that I was referring to, had 2 children, neither of whom became an attorney. One who became a doctor, but also a screenwriter, wrote the very successful movie, The Tuskegee Airman. My other cousin never became an attorney. She became an actress, a very successful actress. And when I would run into her, she would say to me, I make more money on Law and Order playing an attorney than you do as an attorney. And I'm sure she's right. I started off in a very traditional way. I was in law school, and I had a chance to get a summer job at the New York County District Attorney's Office. The New York County District Attorney's Office, under the leadership of Frank Hogan at that time in the 1970s, was considered the premier district attorney's office in the country. Every district attorney around the country wanted to be like Frank Hogan. And so I was honored to get the position to work there while I was in law school. Unfortunately, I soon became somewhat disillusioned. I saw prosecutors sort of maneuvering, manipulating, whatever you want to call it, witnesses, cops, into creating a false narrative of what actually occurred because they wanted to win. And it was inevitable if you were in that business that you did that. I didn't understand at the time why that was so. And so when I graduated from law school, I had a chance to stay there. And then I also had the opportunity to go to what was a brand new prosecution office. It was called the Office of the Special Prosecutor in New York State. It was an organization set up to investigate the criminal justice system, the judges, the lawyers, the cops, and all those in law enforcement. And it was as a result of some hearings in the early 1970s called the Knapp Commission, which was investigating allegations of misconduct that had been brought to their attention by a police officer named Frank Serpico. And if you've never heard of Frank Serpico, there's a very good movie that talks about what he went through, starring Al Pacino. It's really very good, very accurate. And Serpico and others testified before the Knapp Commission that the entire police department, New York City Police Department, was corrupt. It was almost hard to believe, but there it was, right in front of us on TV. And so the governor of the state at the time, Nelson Rockefeller, decided he had to do something. And he also didn't like the mayor of New York at the time, John Lindsay. So he thought he could embarrass Lindsay and at the same time do something good for himself and the Republican Party by appointing a special prosecutor. And that special prosecutor was named Maurice Najari. And Najari had been an assistant district attorney in New York County in Frank Hogan's office for many, many years, had an incredible record of winning. And he assembled a small group of attorneys, 35 of us, 100 investigators who were there to investigate the system. And the newspapers ballyhooed us, and we were going to do such wonderful things. And for the first 2 years of our existence, we did, until we set our sights not simply on cops, but on judges, lawyers, politicians. And when the office indicted the New York State Bronx Democratic leader, the state Democratic leader, our days were numbered. The new governor, Hugh Carey, came in and decided to fire Najari on December 23rd, 1975. And we did what we could to keep Najari in office. We convinced the Attorney General of the state to give him another 6 months. And during that 6 months, we tried to go after everyone we could who we thought there was evidence of corruption around their lives. We indicted 11 judges. And in the end, Najari was replaced, and Carey appointed someone who I won't say was a stooge for him. That may be too strong of a word, but close to a stooge. And he began to tamp down on everything we were doing. He would dismiss cases. He would agree with the defense attorneys that the judges shouldn't be prosecuted on various cases. The things that I was doing there, the investigations I was conducting, the new boss was very critical of. And yet, in each of the cases that I brought, they were convicted and their convictions were sustained by the appellate courts. But there came a point, even I had enough of that, and so I left. And I found out, to my dismay, that I had made so many enemies in the establishment, everybody who was in my office did, that I couldn't get a job in the establishment. And so I was left to go on my own and to pursue a career as a criminal defense attorney. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know how to be a criminal defense attorney. But what I found out almost immediately was that my morals, which were considered pristine when I was a special prosecutor, were no longer considered that. Now I was considered to be like every other defense attorney, a skell, somebody who you couldn't really distinguish from his client. And that is part of the system. You may not believe it. You see defense attorneys and prosecutors say hello to each other and talk to each other, but they're not really friends. And most prosecutors think badly about defense attorneys. They think that they have low morals when it comes to the judicial system. In any event, I continued on looking to see where my niche was. And on May 30, I believe May 30, 1980, it was a Memorial Day weekend, Friday afternoon, I received a call from a federal judge saying to me, would you go over to the Brooklyn Federal Court? And there's somebody over there that has to sign an agreement to go into the witness protection program. And I said, of course, Judge. I went, I met with the prosecutor, and there were two prosecutors, one from the federal court, Ed McDonald, and one from the state court, Richard Broder. And Broder was from the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. And they said to me that they had a person who was down the hall who they wanted to agree to plead guilty to various crimes that he had committed and then go into the witness protection program and be a witness for both the state and the federal government. And I said, well, this all sounds pretty good and pretty easy to me, but let me at least meet with my client before I just do your bidding. And I went down the hall, I opened the door, and I walked in, and I met a fellow, and I said, what's your name? And he said, Henry Hill. To those of you who watch the movie Goodfellas, you know the name Henry Hill. To those of you who don't know the name, go watch the movie Goodfellas. And I asked Henry what it was that made him such a popular person with the Nassau County District Attorney's Office and the federal prosecutors. And he said, I know about how the biggest robbery ever committed in America happened, the Lufthansa Air robbery. And I said, well, it sounds to me like we're in a much better position than they told me outside. And I said, tell me, do you have any charges pending? He said, I have multiple indictments for narcotic trafficking pending in Nassau. And to those of you who saw the movie, you recall the helicopters at the end of the movie taking Henry into custody. I said to him, let me try to negotiate a better deal for you. And I went out and I told them, that is McDonald and Broder and the FBI agents who were all assembled, Henry's pleading guilty to nothing. Henry is going to get full immunity if you want him to cooperate. And they yelled at me and et cetera, and I won't repeat their language, but ultimately they agreed because that's how important the Lufthansa robbery was to them. And an hour later, I went back into the office. I sat down with Henry. I said, you don't have to plead guilty to anything. But here's the deal. If you are going to go into this program, you and your wife, Karen, and your children have to go as well. And it means never speaking to your relatives again. And Karen said, I can't do that. So she said, would you talk to my mother and my father? And if you've seen the movie, you know what her mother was like. And that's exactly what she was like. And I talked to the mother, and she screamed at me. And ultimately, Karen agreed, and the children agreed, and off they went. But now, and I'll get into more of Henry's story in a later episode, but now I had not only made enemies of the establishment when I was with the special prosecutor's office, but I had now eliminated a source of business as a defense attorney, the mafia. They were not going to hire someone who was representing the biggest rat of all time. And so I lost that business, and from there wound up doing narcotic work. And that is considered the lowest rung of work you can do by federal prosecutors and judges. And so my reputation suffered there as well. And unfortunately for the prosecutors and the judges and maybe others, all of the cases that I defended, I was winning, one after another, and making headlines at the same time. We'll go into those more on another occasion. But I became a target of the government at that point. And that target, that on my back, led 2008, almost 20 years later, to my being targeted by the government. I was representing a very substantial international person accused of drug trafficking named Shaheed Roger Khan. The government prosecutors decided, rather than go after Khan because I was undermining their case with my attacks in court, that they would go after me. And so they sent an informant into my office, and he was scripted and wired and kept saying things, and I was ignoring what he was saying because I've heard this kind of talk for 40 years at that point and hadn't paid attention to it over the time, nor would any of my colleagues, nor would any prosecutor. I ignored it. But by just saying, yeah, I agree with you, the government ultimately caused me and my young associate, 27-year-old, in the office to be indicted for attempted tampering with witnesses. I was convicted. She was convicted. And the judge in the case sentenced me to 10 years in prison. So when I tell you that this program is like none other, no one else has the background I've had, and I'm sure you'll agree that this is a worthwhile listen. Thank you. This is Robert Simels, and this is Injustice for All.